Hello and welcome back to Offside, Barca Football's YouTube channel. As usual, a lot of things happening, and we are nearing the transfer window. So we thought here at Barca Football that we would actually take a look at some of the positions and the roles and the profiles that this Barca team needs to be able to reach the next level for the season that's coming. But before we get into that, I would like to welcome Dev back to the show. Dev, how are you? How are things with you?
Hey, Dom, to our listeners and viewers, yes, sometime back we started reviewing some of the coaches that were linked to Barca. We thought that we would take this time as we go into the transfer window and talk about profiles and some names which are relevant to what FC Barcelona might need, also taking into account their financial situation and how much they can spend and the complementary aspect of these profiles. So we'll showcase a few players while we also talk about genuine discussions that happen in the media around players who will be obviously linked to Barca. So hopefully it will be a good experience for us to learn and bring it in front of you and for you to share and give your opinion. So with that, back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Dev. Exactly. As Dev said, this will be a series. To make an introduction to this series, we'll just take the profiles and see, okay, these are the kind of players that Barca need. And then once we have identified those profiles, we will go into the series and week after week, we will give you the names that we think fit those profiles. So the first profile I would like to discuss is the very obvious one, which is the left winger situation. Now, we do know that Barca are missing a profile here, actually missing a player here, because they've been playing with players a left wing who don't necessarily either fit that need or don't really actually play in that role at all. Or if they do, maybe they're not best utilized in that particular position. Now, I've listed some of the names here that we do have or might have in the team come next season. And I would just want to talk about the differential quality that these players can offer Barca. Now, when we talk about the left winger profile, obviously we can talk about a goal scorer or a creator. Now, it depends of what Barca think or feel that is more necessary or more needed in this very moment. And this does depend on the players that play next to this player. But let's say that we do have someone like Roque on the left wing or someone like Ansu Fati or even someone like Ferran Torres occupying this area right here. Now, this gives you a very unique outlook on this profile because now we're talking more about inside forwards and goal scorers. These are the players that will start on the left wing, but they're mostly half space players who will run into the box and occupy this area and be much more efficient right here up in the box and then potentially in the half space, but not necessarily wide, and they're not necessarily natural wingers or one versus one wingers or creators. They can be exploiters of space. They certainly can. They do have the legs and they do have the movement, but they fall into the category of inside forward. So they are much different than your traditional wingers that you would see occupying the wings on their preferred or sort of foot. Now, this is not to say that these are the bad profiles. They're just different. They bring you something different entirely. And Barca do, or maybe they will have at least one of these players. We do have, don't we know that Ansu Fati is on loan at the moment. He might return, he might not return. We don't know yet. Roque is someone who's been playing very few minutes this season, and chances are that he might not even be here come next season. So that leaves us with Ferran Torres, who gives you that kind of profile if you want him to be that. However, he might also be playing at the center forward role, so we don't really know. Uh, on the other hand, if you have someone like Felix, for example, or someone like Rafinha or Cancelo, these are the different types of players. These players will give you something more in terms of creativity and progression. Of course, Felix can score goals. He can occupy this area in the box. And maybe Rafinha can too, but he does so more on the right side of the pitch than on the left side of the pitch. So on the left, these are the players who will give you more in terms of creativity and more in terms of progression and more in terms of those underlying metrics that don't necessarily result or they're not really at the end of the actions as the goal scorers. Again, not a bad option, just a different one. Now, the question becomes, do Barca want more of these profiles, or do they more want of the profiles that we discussed earlier in terms of goal scorers? We'll still see Barca be very direct, very vertical. They will want to exploit space very quickly and very efficiently. And that means that this player, whoever he is, this mystery player, needs to tick some of the basic options or basic aspects that I've noted down here. First and foremost, in order for this Barca to be more than they currently are, this player would ideally be a self-sufficient player, a game breaker profile. What this means is that he can do something out of nothing. He can start on this left wing, and regardless of game state, regardless of the structure around him, helping him or not helping him to achieve something, he can do something on his own. He can flip a switch and he can be the differential quality when Barca need him to be just that. This player should also be someone with pace and power and someone who's one versus one specialist. Now, why? If you have a natural winger right here, and Barca, what they tend to do is they want to isolate their wingers. They want their wingers to be in one versus one situations and then run at the opposition. That means that this player, in ideal scenarios, should be a one versus one specialist. If he is the one in isolation here, he should be able to ideally move on the inside or move on the outside to beat his marker and comfortably get into the box or near the edge of the box. And then Barca have to decide, okay, do we want this player to be more of a goal scorer and a creator, and ultimately that will define the name of that player. However, one more crucial thing is the dynamic with Balde, because Balde is, once he returns, hopefully fit and ready to fire, he will probably be the starter left back profile that we have. And Balde, if he's not forced to be more than he is at this minute, he will be a very big, I want to say signing, he will be a very big profile player for Barcelona in next season. And that means that this player should ideally be someone who's more of a natural winger who will take the responsibility of Ubalde and make sure that he can operate in these higher areas of the pitch, whether that's out wide or maybe more inverted, but he needs to man the flank and be this offensive threat, offensive presence, so that the Ubalde can be who he's meant to be at this stage of his career, and that is more of a defensive presence, someone who can cover this area behind the winger, and then someone who doesn't have to go up and down the flank constantly every 2 minutes. Because if Barca lose the ball quickly and Balde is the width holder and Balde is the attacker on the left, the only attacker on the left, that means that he is required to both attack and defend in the span of a couple of minutes, and that is very taxing, and not to mention suboptimal for the structure as a whole. So when we talk about this left winger profile, the only thing Barca need to decide is, okay, do we have enough goals in the front line? Because we have Lewandowski here, for example, and you have Lamine. So will they give you more goals? Will they give you more creativity? So Barca have to decide, is this player going to be a creator or a goal scorer? That is the only question mark left. However, even regardless of that, he should be someone who is self-sufficient, so someone who doesn't depend on others as much, and he has to be someone with pace and power and one versus one specialist who will unlock Balde or just let Balde be Balde at this stage of his career. So, Dev, I think when we look at it this way, this is what I would say Barcelona should look for in a left winger at this minute.
I agree, Dom. If you look at the two formations, this 4-3-3, 4-3-2-1, or 4-2-3-1, depending on how the team falls back when they're not in possession, there is an absolute need for this profile to come in. And we would not talk about names today, but this is a glaring gap that Barcelona has, especially if you look into the way they want to attack. If you look at our inefficacy in attacking or breaking down blocks, I think this is a profile that is absolutely needed. How it can be complementary to the other profiles is where the scouting department comes in, is where we need to have the right decisions, the right thinking, and FC Barcelona has not been known to do a very good job out of that. So hold your horses. But without a doubt, this is one of the profiles that we should look at, even if it's not an elite player, as long as they're good in, at least for La Liga, it's one that we need to look into.
Realistically, yes, it won't be a game breaker profile. It won't be someone who comes in and decides games on his own. I don't think Barca have the financial capabilities to go for such a player. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they will sell half the squad this summer and then we go for such a player, but we don't know that. In the current state, in the current financial means, we can't really go for such a player. But okay, let's leave the left winger aside for a second and let's move on to the next profile that we should be looking for this summer. And now we come to the most pressing matter, the pivotal player of this Barca team, pun not intended here, which is the number 6 role. And we know this is a big need of Barcelona. I don't need to explain much why and how we've come to this situation, but it is still a problem. So years after losing Busquets, after losing that player, we're still looking and scrambling for a solution, and we're yet to find one. Now, in ideal situation or an ideal scenario, Barca would play something like this. They would have a lone pivot in this area, and this player, again, in ideal situations, would be someone who, again, is self-sufficient, just like the left winger. So he would be able to man this area right here and be able to cover this area both on and off the ball. He will be someone who can receive from the first line and then be the progressor if needs be. So he can be vertical if he has to be, but he can also be very horizontal and more of a recycler if the situation calls for such an action. And he should also be someone with high football IQ or just a reading of the game so that he knows when to push forward and he knows when to drop back. Realistically, that kind of a player in the current market, the current state of football, if such a player was available in the market, he would probably cost hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And Barca don't have that kind of money. So even if that player was out there for us to grab, we don't have the means to go for him. Instead, what I do believe will happen next season is more of what we've seen this season. And I think it will be the continuation of the double pivot system. And that means that we will have to take this ideal player that we talked about just now, the number six, that of kind of create that player in the aggregate. And that means that the two players will have to be molded into one to cover the holes of each other and then create that special pairing or a special duo that can do both things equally well at a high enough level. That means that we already have the technical side of the side. We have the passy players, the technical players, like the Pedris and Gundogas and Gavis of our team, who can play next to this player and be this player who has much more freedom on and off the ball, who can move up and down the pitch as he pleases, and he's much more technical, he's much more progressive in his nature, and much more free in his nature. And that also means that his partner should be what Romeo was meant to be in theory, but in practice, unfortunately, due to different circumstances, it didn't really work out. However, Romeo on paper seemed to tick those boxes. He was the more horizontal presence, someone who will man this area of the pitch as opposed to manning this area of the pitch, right? So he's someone who's much more safer in his approach, much more limited in the zones that he occupies. So he would maybe occupy this zone right here and potentially be able to go a bit further up in case the situation asks him to do that. However, he's much more limited compared to his double pivot partner who gets more freedom, who gets more responsibility in practically all the phases. But what he has to do or be is be the pass first player. What I mean by this is that he doesn't have to be a technical elite. Of course, he has to be good on the ball. That goes without saying for a Barca player. But he has to have the instinct to pass the ball first as opposed to running with the ball first. And that's very important because he has to be in the zones that we just highlighted. One other thing is that I would love for this player to be a dueler, to be the lungs of this midfield and the legs of this midfield. Because if this other player in the double pivot is the more free one who gets to go forward, who gets to be the creative force and maybe be the attacking force at the same time next to his number 10 teammate, then this player has to have the lungs and the capacity to actually cover and be the shield the team needs him to be. Now, Barca's structure off the ball, especially, has been a bit leaky, and that's why the emphasis is on the legs. Because if you put a player who doesn't have that in this situation, like Romeo, who was time and again exposed to these vast acres of space behind the attacking unit, then he would struggle. Of course, he did struggle because he didn't have the capacity to actually fulfill that role or what was asked of him in that moment. He was asked to be much more than he is in this stage of his career, and that kind of highlighted his flaws and masked his strengths. And we need to make sure that this player, if he's left in this situation where he has to cover a lot of ground, that at least that he's more capable of doing so, especially in these transitional moments that Barca often suffer from. So, in a nutshell, this is what this player should be. It's not the ideal pivot. I know that because we're not looking for the ideal pivot. We're not looking for the single pivot at all. We're looking for someone who is compatible with our technical players, with the players who are more on the ball players. So this player should actually be a much different kind of presence that complements the Pedris and the Gundogans and the Gavis of our world. So this is someone that we are looking for this summer, Dev. And I feel like this player doesn't have to be the elite of the elite as long as he is good at what he does, as long as he fits and ticks these boxes that we just highlighted.
And I think the whole Barca fan base wants this person, and I've been wanting this person for the longest time. I do agree that we don't have the money to get a single lone pivot who can be just elite. I don't think we have the finances for that. I personally think that maybe a double pivot is not a bad idea, given that realistically Gavi will be back in action next year, and he'll do a lot of the pressing and the ball winning and just the defensive activities that need to happen. The problem with Gundo and Pedri are they're highly technical, but they're not defensive, and they don't have the legs to really provide any sort of defense in the face of a counter or a transition. They just don't have the legs. So you need people who have that physicality, the ball winning capability. Now, Gavi's one for sure, but Gavi can be injured. Gavi already is injured. I don't think Gavi's coming back till the end of the year. So you need somebody who can be used in a double pivot system so that uh, A, ball circulation, and B, defensive solidity, because what we don't have is that connection between the midfield and the defense. We have probably got a good defense. I won't say it's great, but it's good. But we don't have any sort of cohesion between the midfield and the defense that we have, and that creates a challenge. So yes, double pivot insanely required. Lots of names floating around. Lots of names we have talked about. Lots of names you will see on Twitter and everywhere, literally every day. How many of them we can afford? We have grave questions. But if one sees, and if you look into other Liga sides that are playing this season who don't have a budget, like FC Barca or Real Madrid or what have you, many of them have really good pivots and they play well. They may not be elite, but Marcel's not playing anywhere close to elite these days. So if we can keep those arguments aside and look at good players who can do the job and can be complementary, I think that's the most important thing. Now the question is who is doing the scouting, who is getting the right person, who is doing all that, because we're just not good when it comes to player profiling, player scouting, and getting them to deliver for us on the pitch. We get good names for sure. So I just hope that this time we don't get carried away by names. We actually get carried away by the problem and we try to solve for the problem that Barca has. And hopefully that will make the season much more interesting.
Yes, I agree, and you absolutely nailed it there. If as long as Barca are chasing names, we actually won't get what we need. So that is the biggest problem for Barca as of late. But yeah, we'll leave that aside for a different time. So the final player I think Barcelona should be looking at is the center forward. Now, at this very moment, it doesn't seem like Barca are in a dire need of a center forward. We have Lewandowski, we have Roque, we have Ferran. But when you look at it, he's getting a bit older, right? Now, Roque, we know what happened to Roque. It is unlikely that he will be the center forward moving forward, which leaves us with Ferran Torres, who could be an option. But then again, he's also someone that Barcelona could be looking to cash in on because he is marketable. He does have some sort of market value, and we just don't know. So I think this is an issue that Barca should tackle sooner rather than later. And having a center forward fits the mold, who gives you that quality, who gives you something that you're missing, which obviously goals at this very minute, would be crucial for them to reach the next level, to improve the team and be more than they have been so far. Now, if we talk about that center forward, I feel like first and foremost, that person needs to be non-game state dependent. What that means is that in simple terms, you're looking at the very modern and idealistic type of player who is very effective playing the way Barca are playing right now. So that means that he is very effective at exploiting the space in behind the opposition's backline if necessary. So that means that he can be the outlet, he can be the pressure valve in case Barcelona are pinned down. They need to get out quickly, and they need to get out with a direct route, very vertical route, which they have been doing for so long. And that's why the back to goal and tight spaces play come into play as well. Because if this player has a marker on his back, he needs to be able to wrestle that marker off and then maybe play on the marker on his back and then lay the ball off into the sides, into the other runners, other outlets that Barca have or want to have going into next season. However, what this also means is that when Barca do face those low blocks, this player has to be able to command the area and be this machine who can create the chances for himself and actually be this very the finisher who doesn't depend on the system that much. So more of an instinctive finisher, someone who gets the ball in these tricky box situations, and then he can carve out the action or the chance for himself. Lewandowski is very good at doing that. However, Lewandowski's form or just his age catching up mean that he is on a downward spiral as opposed to being someone who can next season be more than he was in this current season. So this player needs to thrive in these two game states. So the transitional, the very space exploiting game state, but also inside the box game state where Barca can actually pin down the opposition and be the team who is sustaining pressure. And then this guy, with his movement, with his creativity, and his instincts, can create inside that area. And when I say a transferable profile, I mean that if you buy this player who's playing in team X, Y, and Z, and that team might be of lower quality, for example, his profile is transferable to Barcelona, means that it doesn't lose quality. He can remain who he was in the previous team and transfer that profile to Barca and still retain that level. So this is very important because that's what happens when you buy players whose profiles are not necessarily transferable. You get a player who shines in one environment and then he gets transferred to a different team and suddenly his level drops significantly because he doesn't fit the environment or maybe his profile wasn't as transferable. And I think at the end of the day, this player has to be an athlete because Barca players need to cover a lot of ground. They need to run both on and off the ball. And I think it's very important that this player has the legs. And I think Lewandowski just doesn't have that. Ferran does to a certain extent. Roque does, but we don't know the future of these players. So I think when it comes down to it, this player should be able to cover a lot of ground, both when Barca are attacking, to drag markers, to be an outlet, to be the pressure valve, but also off the ball to lead the press alongside Rafinha, alongside Gavi, alongside whoever it is in that front line. And Barca can use the pressing as a mechanism to create and defend at the same time.
We have talked about it all season long. But I've always said that our forward line is good on paper, but they're not really an effective forward line. And that can be made out because if you look into any team out there in at least in La Liga, I don't think teams fear our forwards at all. I don't think anybody fears them. The second is look at the data and look at the number of goals that our combined forwards have actually scored for us. If you think about the Barcelona all-conquering Barca sides of the past, you would get them maybe scoring 100 goals or at least 90 to 100 goals a season, right? Now it's about 70, 75, 80 in a season. That's max. And within that, also, if you look into it, Lewandowski would be about 15 or 17 or 18 of them. And the rest comes from genuinely a lot of the other people coming together and contributing. So yes, as a total team, everybody contributes with more goals. But you can't win elite games and you can't defeat elite sides if you do not have an elite forward line that are one that can destabilize defenses, that you need to be mindful of them. You need to pay attention to them. If you think about Madrid and we think about Rodrigo and we think about Vinicius and we think about Bellingham, and automatically you'll have to think about, okay, how am I going to stop these guys, right? The moment you think about it from that perspective, your game plan changes. You don't press as much. You are far more circumspect into how you attack, how you don't attack, because you're constantly thinking about, okay, I want to concede too many. And that thing has totally gone from a Barca point of view. Nobody really actually sits back for us anymore because they're thinking that, okay, I've got to be careful against these. Nobody's scared of Ferran Torres running at them or Vitor Roque play or Lewandowski running at them. And Lewandowski is not very good at playing on the shoulder as well. Not anymore. So there are many challenges here from a forward standpoint. It's even more critical because finding people who can reliably score 20 goals a season is very hard. It's extremely hard, right? So it's not as simple as, okay, I'm going to just bring a replacement and that's it, problem solved. There are hardly a few replacements out there who can come in and do that job. Somebody's got to score those 20 goals. If you take Lewandowski off, who's going to score those 20 goals? Lamine Yamal is not going to score that. Ferran Torres is not going to score those 20 goals. Joao Felix is not going to score those 20 goals. So who is going to score those 20 goals, right? And we don't have that many number names. And you can be the best coach and the best team and the most drilled midfield and the most drilled defense. If you do not have those players who can bang in those 20 goals, you're not winning. And I don't know what the easy answer is, because even if you go out in the market, even if you have the money, even if you have 70, $80 million, right? Who are you bringing in? Which player are you bringing in who will miraculously come and make this situation better? There are hardly any at this moment who can. So you'll have more people who are good in attacking spaces who can all contribute to the goal. Fermin Lopez contributed 8 goals this season. So you have profiles like that, and that's where the goals come from. I don't think we have players out there who can readily replace Lewandowski, and that's a problem because Lewandowski is not going to contribute that much. We all know that.
Yeah.
He'll still score maybe 10, 15 goals, that's fine, but he's not going to make us win championships. That's just, let's be honest about it, it's not going to happen. But the problem is, if you remove him, there is nobody who can even score those 15 that he's scoring. And that's a problem for Barca. But rest assured, as we go through the weeks, we will be looking into some of these profiles. We'll also look into some names that can potentially fit within these needs for Barca, given their financial situation. Who can we realistically get and what can we realistically expect as we go into next season? So with that, that was our curtain raiser. We hope you enjoy this small introduction. As we go into the weeks thereafter, we'll bring much more detailed content around players, their scouting profiles, and how they can fit in. So tune in, subscribe, share, and spread the word. Until then, Visca el Barça.